Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be defining HRIS mapping and talking about why it matters.
A map is not a territory. A representation of the world is not the world. Reality is often just out of grasp. But we have to find ways to represent it to move forward and act.
That's the goal of a map, to create a visual representation of what we see. When you're on a road trip, for example, it's easy to understand the relationship, whether you're using your smartphone's GPS or an old paper map that you can never manage to fold correctly.
But important details can sometimes get lost in the folds that a map doesn't always address. Nevertheless, we need the imperfect representation to guide us in HRIS as elsewhere. So, HRIS mapping. What's the story?
In this case, what we're trying to represent is the role of the HR department, people working with other people to produce things, a collection of processes, like recruitment for example.
A collection of steps designed to attain a result. At each step, people play their roles by using information to perform actions, a business procedure.
Describing that procedure is the first step in mapping. It's the representation of the way you deliver a service. This functional map can have different levels of detail.
But whatever the level of detail, it will be a representation of what happens. For example, for the recruitment process, it will go something like this. The manager expresses a need to hire, HR suggests a job description, and so on right up until the end where the manager's need is met.
And this is where the subtleties emerge, the limitations of the map, with questions like, what do we do about the steps in the process that have to do with the budget and management control? And then questions about the level of detail in the description of the process.
This map of the process is a first step. You outline what you do in a clear way and then transpose it all into IT.
And you have to represent that step as well. This is applications mapping. In other words, all of the steps in the functional map as long as the format they use.
Do you do it by hand? In an Excel file that Paul emails to Nicole? Via recruitment software that's not integrated into the HRIS? Via a best of breed? Or the HR module of an ERP suite? In short, you look at the flow of information to see how it travels and which tools manage it.
This seems like a good place to sum up the state of affairs in practice. Either it's 1, done by hand with no IT involved and all the charm of paperwork, or 2, done using Microsoft Office tools like Word and Excel and shared via email or a server, so it relies on some IT tools, B is still old-fashioned, or 3, it's truly digital and relies on an IT application that is more or less integrated into the HRIS.
This applications map tells you more or less how digital the functional processes have become and which tools are used.
When you compare the map of the business procedure to the applications map, you get a picture of the rate of digitalization.
And that's exactly what these maps are for. They represent how things get done and tell us how digital the process is, to help guide our decisions in terms of the future digitalization of the HR department. Keeping the topographic analogy, it's what we call the urbanization or integration of the HRIS.
The functional map represents the land and the applications map represents roads and cities. On the one hand, you've got the representation of the process. On the other, its degree of digitalization.
To recap, mapping your HRIS is about representing your HR processes via a functional map, and then how digitalized they are via an applications map. The differences between the two help guide decisions about how to develop your HRIS. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short.
Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.